Imagine waking up trapped inside a highly classified steel pressure cooker that burns through $2.5 million in operational costs every single day. You are completely isolated above a 4,000-foot deep ocean abyss, sleeping directly on top of 3 million pounds of high explosive ordnance. This is the terrifying, inescapable reality for the raw recruits deployed to the most unforgiving maritime battle space on the planet. But how exactly does a fragile mind survive its first plunge into this claustrophobic nightmare? Let's cross the quarterdeck and uncover the brutal, unfiltered truth of a sailor's first 48 hours. At this exact second, a 19-year-old kid steps onto 97,000 tons of sovereign American diplomacy. They carry a 60-pound sea bag and a spiked heart rate exceeding 130 beats per minute. Behind them lies the quiet comfort of a suburban civilian bedroom. Ahead towers the USS Nimitz, a 1,092-foot nuclear Leviathan powered by dual A4W pressurized water reactors, generating 190 thermal megawatts each. The contrast is violently absolute and aggressively unforgiving for these young sailors. A newly minted E3 airman, earning barely $2,377 in monthly base pay, is trusted around $70 million FA-18F Super Hornets. Acoustic trauma hits their eardrums before they even clear the steel quarterdeck. Twin General Electric F4, 1.4 turbofan engines scream at a physically punishing 150 decibels, liquefying the air and vibrating the HY-80 steel hull. This is not a choreographed Hollywood production, and there is zero margin for human error. Welcome to the most psychologically destructive and physically demanding 48 hours in the United States military. Every year, thousands of exhausted recruits are violently thrust directly into this hyperkinetic strike group environment. Operating on barely 45 minutes of fragmented sleep, their cognitive processing is overwhelmed by sheer industrial scale. They are walking blindly into a floating, autonomous city occupied by 5,200 highly synced tactical personnel. It is a hostile labyrinth containing exactly 3,360 watertight compartments, exposed 460-volt electrical buses, and 600 pounds per square inch superheated steam lines. In this hypervigilant battle space, a fractional lapse in situational awareness does not simply earn a basic written reprimand. It triggers catastrophic mechanical failure, permanent bodily dismemberment, or instantaneous explosive death for the entire deck crew. The United States operates 11 of these apex strategic assets continuously around the globe. They project insurmountable, uninterrupted kinetic dominance across the Indo-Pacific, the Mediterranean, and the highly volatile Strait of Hormuz. Yet, behind the integrated Aegis combat systems and classified radar cross-sections, the foundation of this asymmetric power is entirely human flesh. It relies exclusively on the unbreakable psychological resilience of terrified teenagers, actively suppressing their deepest biological survival instincts. During these critical initial hours, extreme sensory overload is practically weaponized to systematically break down civilian habits. The toxic, acrid stench of JP-5 aviation fuel permanently infiltrates their lungs, pores, and standard issue uniforms. The massive 4.5-acre flight deck constantly pitches violently under their steel-toed boots, proving the ocean remains an unpredictable, lethal variable. Their personal sanctuary is reduced to a microscopic metal coffin rack measuring exactly 72 inches long, 30 wide, and 24 high. We will deeply dissect the brutal, methodical anatomy of this calculated military sensory obliteration. You will see exactly how naval doctrine aggressively rewires a fragile civilian brain to function flawlessly inside a Tier 1 combat zone. This is the exact unyielding daily crucible that forges soft civilians into the deadliest maritime aviation strike force in human history. But surviving this massive mechanical beast requires passing the first psychological test. And that brutal test begins right at the gangway, approaching the massive concrete pier. The sheer physical mass of a Nimitz-class supercarrier fundamentally alters the surrounding atmospheric pressure, displacing 100,000 long tons of dense salt water. Its towering gray hull blocks out the entire horizon like a man-made eclipse. The terrified recruit must ascend the steep aluminum brow, a 50-foot inclined gangway engineered with high-friction anti-skid coating to prevent fatal slipping. Every heavy step upward forcefully crushes their civilian identity, physically transporting them into a highly classified, heavily weaponized sovereign jurisdiction, stopping precisely 3/4 up the aggressive incline. The exhausted sailor executes a razor-sharp salute to the national ensign flying astern. They pivot sharply to face the officer of the deck, a heavily armed tactical sentinel commanding the ship's bustling quarterdeck, presenting their encrypted common access card. The teenager forcefully requests formal permission to board this $13 billion maritime fortress. This mandatory verbal exchange instantly strips away their individual autonomy, legally binding their physiological existence to the operational strike group. Once clearance is aggressively granted, an assigned escort marches a disoriented recruit directly into the administrative nerve center. They permanently hand over their highly encrypted medical history, dental records, and biometric emergency data. The most severe psychological hit occurs when signing the service member's group life insurance, acknowledging a maximum $500,000 payout to their grieving parents. That brutal ink signature violently confirms that Tier 1 maritime aviation is a fundamentally lethal, high-casualty enterprise with zero margin for error. With processing finalized, the escort leads them away from the natural ultraviolet sunlight and directly into the ship's claustrophobic iron belly. They plunge blindly into a highly pressurized, windowless labyrinth, reinforced by 2.5-inch thick HY80 high-yield steel bulkheads designed to absorb torpedo impacts. The passageways violently twist and intersect across 11 distinct deck levels, creating a hostile, geometric maze containing exactly 360 watertight compartments. A suffocating feeling of total entrapment instantly spikes their cortisol levels as heavy armored doors seal off the outside world. Navigating this chaotic internal architecture requires instantly mastering a complex alphanumeric matrix universally known as the ship's bullseye system. Stenciled aggressively on every bulkhead, cryptic codes like 3-150-0-L mathematically dictate the exact vertical deck, forward frame, and precise relation to the center line for a recruit operating on severely fragmented sleep. Translating these tactical coordinates feels like solving advanced calculus under enemy fire. Getting violently lost is a statistical guarantee, routinely leading terrified sailors into highly classified nuclear reactor zones heavily guarded by lethal force. Movement inside the hull is a physically punishing, full-body athletic event, requiring unrelenting spatial awareness and maximum cardiovascular endurance. The Leviathan operates under strict damage control protocols, meaning thousands of heavy, fireproof steel hatches remain permanently sealed to prevent catastrophic flooding. Advancing just 50 feet forward requires manually unlatching and violently slamming shut multi-dog steel doors weighing a massive 200 pounds each. Sailors must aggressively step over 18-inch high watertight combings, ensuring a fractional miscalculation results in shattered tibias or even severe cranial trauma. Descending deeper into the subterranean berthing levels, the harsh fluorescent overhead tubes are systematically extinguished without any prior warning. They are instantly replaced by an eerie, low-intensity tactical red illumination, meticulously designed to preserve critical night vision for the lethal flight deck crew. However, for a physically exhausted recruit, this permanent crimson wavelength completely obliterates their brain's natural circadian rhythm and melatonin production. The human mind rapidly loses all temporal concept of day and night, plunging the sailor into a perpetual, mind-bending twilight state. The massive HVAC ventilation ducts constantly pump a distinct, oily mixture of recycled oxygen and vaporized JP5 jet fuel into their burning lungs. They are forcefully breathing the same heavily filtered air shared by 5,200 adrenaline-fueled human beings. But as the heavy watertight door to their assigned berthing compartment swings open, a putrid wave of dense heat hits their face.
the terrified recruit instantly realizes that the physical exhaustion of the maze is absolutely nothing compared to the psychological horror waiting directly inside the rack. The heavy HY80 steel, watertight door forcefully slams shut behind them, locking the recruit inside a hyper-compressed biological storage facility.
Older Nimitz-class berthing compartments aggressively pack up to 180 physically exhausted sailors into a single, windowless acoustic nightmare, completely sealed off from the outside world. The highly anticipated personal sanctuary is instantly revealed to be a claustrophobic maze of 3-tier aluminum racks, stacked precisely 72 inches high from the deck to the overhead. Ambient temperatures routinely hover around a suffocating 85 degrees Fahrenheit, heavily saturated with the collective body heat and sweat of a continuously rotating combat crew. Personal space is not simply restricted in this hostile environment. It is systematically eradicated by the brutal realities of naval architecture. The actual sleeping dimensions are physically unforgiving, a severely thin fire-retardant mattress measuring exactly 72 inches long by a claustrophobic 30 inches wide. If assigned the dreaded top bunk, a recruit possesses a maximum of 24 inches of vertical clearance before their face grazes a ceiling, heavily laced with exposed, high-pressure ventilation pipes. A single, microscopic aluminum locker, measuring barely 1.5 cubic feet, must ruthlessly condense their entire physical existence into a highly compressed geometric puzzle. Unlike a civilian university dormitory, an operational Tier 1 military berthing is a chaotic, 24-hour kinetic transit hub that absolutely never ceases movement. The United States Navy operates on a brutal, staggered shift schedule, demanding the twin A4W nuclear reactors are actively monitored by hypervigilant personnel 100% of the time. This strategic reality dictates that while 60 exhausted sailors desperately attempt to achieve REM sleep, another 60 are aggressively slamming heavy metal lockers and lacing up steel-toed boots. There is absolutely no universally recognized nighttime inside this high-pressure, perpetually red-lit operational environment. The ambient noise level inside the steel compartment is a permanent, multi-layered assault on the human auditory and central nervous systems. These specific berthing spaces are strategically positioned directly adjacent to high vibration machinery rooms or bolted immediately underneath the heavily trafficked 5,000-person galley. A sleep-deprived recruit must instantly learn to aggressively ignore the constant, heavy mechanical thud of thousands of boots stomping violently on the steel plates directly overhead. Massive hydraulic pumps and 600 turbo-sized superheated steam lines create a permanent, low-frequency 65 decibel hum that vibrates directly through the aluminum rack and straight into their skeletal structure. Just as the exhausted recruit finally slips into a fragile state of unconsciousness, the ship's 1MC public address system violently crackles to life. A booming, digitally distorted voice aggressively broadcasts tactical engineering drills at maximum volume, instantly spiking their resting heart rate back to 120 beats per minute. But the absolute ultimate sleep destroyer comes directly from above the catastrophic, bone-shaking impact of a fully loaded 45,000-pound F/A-18F Super Hornet slamming into the steel flight deck, just 30 feet above their skull. The Mark 7 arresting gear violently decelerates the strike fighter from 150 miles per hour to absolute zero in precisely 2.2 seconds, sending a massive kinetic shockwave through the compartment. Basic human hygiene in this hyper-condensed environment introduces an entirely new, highly uncomfortable level of psychological friction and forced communal exposure. The bathroom facilities, universally classified in naval terminology as the head, present a harsh, unsympathetic reality check regarding their permanent loss of individual privacy. On these massive supercarriers, a sleep-deprived sailor must physically transit through several heavily populated passageways, completely exposed in a thin standard issue towel, just to access the communal shower block. They are forcefully subjected to sharing a highly limited handful of aggressively low-pressure shower stalls and stainless steel toilets with dozens of highly stressed, impatient shipmates. Luxurious 20-minute hot civilian showers are immediately replaced by a brutal, high-efficiency military survival necessity, known universally as the combat shower. Fresh water is a highly prized, mechanically generated strategic commodity produced by the ship's massive reverse osmosis desalination plants, and any unauthorized waste is aggressively punished. The tactical cleaning procedure is absolutely ruthless. Exactly 30 seconds of water to wet down, secure the brass valve completely to violently scrub, and exactly 60 seconds to rapidly rinse off. Lingering in the hot water for even a fraction of a minute guarantees infuriating the long line of hostile sailors waiting outside. As the recruit collapses back into their cramped, violently vibrating aluminum rack, their physical muscle tissue is screaming for deep, restorative cellular repair. However, their fragile brain is completely saturated with massive, continuous doses of cortisol and the overwhelming, suffocating fear of missing their upcoming 0400 wake-up call. They stare blankly at the crimson-lit steel ceiling, acutely aware they have been mathematically awake for 38 consecutive, physically punishing hours without a single moment of true relief. The brutal realization finally hits them. The highly weaponized environment itself is aggressively resisting their fundamental biological need to recover. But as the piercing 0530 alarm violently shatters their 3 hours of fragmented sleep, this claustrophobic nightmare abruptly ends, only to violently thrust them directly into the most lethal 4.5 acres of sovereign territory on Earth. Crossing the red and white foul line fundamentally alters a sailor's biological perception of human mortality. They are violently thrust onto a 4.5 acre industrial minefield, operating continuously at maximum kinetic capacity. The acoustic trauma is physically paralyzing as 4 45,000-pound F/A, 18F, Super Hornets simultaneously throttle up to military power, sustaining a brutal 150 decibels. The sheer sonic force effortlessly bypasses dual cranial protection to vibrate fragile internal organs. Standing mere inches from the Mark 13 steam catapult trench, the raw thermonuclear energy of naval aviation is aggressively unleashed. A highly synchronized deck crew frantically hooks a 66,000-pound strike fighter directly to the steel-launched shuttle.
In precisely 2 seconds, the shooter drops their hand, instantly vaporizing the humid air with 600 psi superheated steam. The $70 million jet is violently accelerated from 0 to 165 miles per hour, generating 4 crushing G-forces against the pilot's spine. Surviving this hyper-lethal tarmac requires absolute reliance on a highly orchestrated, color-coded human matrix. Green jersey aviation structural mechanics dart aggressively underneath active jet intakes, dodging invisible suction forces capable of instantly ingesting a human torso. Yellow jersey flight directors utilize hyper-precise hand signals to maneuver heavily armed fighters operating with mere inches of wingtip clearance. There is absolutely no verbal communication allowed. Survival relies exclusively on unrelenting visual trust and extreme situational awareness. Recovery operations introduce an entirely new spectrum of sheer mechanical terror for these young, sleep-deprived sailors.
Incoming fighters slam onto the anti-skid steel deck at a terrifying 150 miles per hour, aggressively hunting for one of 4 high-tensile arresting wires. The massive Mark 7 hydraulic engines violently absorb millions of foot-pounds of kinetic energy, bringing the jet to a complete halt in 2.2 seconds. A snapped wire instantly transforms into a supersonic steel whip capable of effortlessly severing human limbs. Yet, it is precisely within this brutal, unforgiving crucible that untested recruits are permanently forged into extraordinary Tier 1 warriors. The overwhelming physical exhaustion and sheer psychological terror systematically strip away all previous layers of peacetime entitlement and suburban comfort. What emerges from this extreme daily suffering is an unbreakable titanium core of fierce self-reliance and profound operational competence. These exhausted 19-year-old teenagers suddenly realize they possess the astonishing capability to command the world's most lethal weapons platforms. The shared psychological trauma of surviving 12-hour flight operations in 110-degree heat creates a physiological bond that ordinary society cannot possibly replicate. They are no longer isolated individuals. They are a highly lethal, mathematically synchronized, family unit bound by shared extreme hardship. When a catastrophic Class Bravo fire erupts, they will instinctively risk their own lives to drag their severely injured shipmates from the toxic flames. This profound level of brotherly devotion represents the absolute highest echelon of human character and loyalty. Behind the highly classified Aegis radar signatures and the astronomical $13 billion price tags, America's true strategic power relies entirely on these kids. They willingly sacrifice their youth, enduring horrific living conditions to project uninterrupted kinetic dominance across the globe's most volatile oceans. Their unwavering dedication ensures that the geopolitical balance of power remains firmly secured by sovereign democratic strength. They are the silent, heavily armed guardians operating flawlessly in the darkest, most hostile environments on Earth. If this deep dive into naval aviation fundamentally changed your perspective on our military personnel, please smash that subscribe button now. Like this video to aggressively boost the algorithm and help us actively honor the immense sacrifices of these maritime defenders. Drop a comment below if you or a family member survived this extreme psychological crucible upon the high seas.